that study, that Harvard study, bought and paid for by sugar, I think has millions of deaths and blood on that study.
Wow.
That Harvard study from the head of the Harvard nutrition group um, was weaponized to influence the food pyramid.
Because of your background in both the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, are the food and pharmaceutical industries conspiring to keep us sick?
Yeah, so now my life's work is to change these incentives, and it stems from early in my career. I was very ideological, got into politics, and inevitably, from the left and the right, you get into consulting and sit across the table from food and pharma executives, and I was floored. I tweeted about this idea of the food stamp bill in 2012, and it's very instructive. Food stamps are a very important program. It's 15% of Americans depend on them for nutrition, and 10% of food stamps. The primary government nutrition program in the United States is spent on sugary drinks,
Wow.
which is just insane.
Sodas and stuff.
Sodas. And I was called with a bunch of, good meaning people to keep that in place when people were questioning it. And there was a three-part playbook, which was we really just tried to rig institutions of trust. That's what I would call it. And one of the shocking things is I found myself in the room with Coke executives and the NAACP, a civil rights group that has done a lot of great work throughout American history. But in this case, it was transactional. It was, we're going to pay you millions of dollars, and you, the NAACP, are going to label our opponents as racist. And there was a massive media campaign. This was in the New York Times at the time in about 2012. And they said that parents who were concerned about their kids drinking 100 times more sugar than they did 100 years ago, ingesting that much sugar, were racist and patriarchal to say that the kids couldn't have soda.
No way.
Yeah, and what's just insane is this has just been so co-opted, and on the right, we went to the Heritage Foundation, conservative think tank, saying it's patriarchal to say what lower income people can drink, but it's a complete bizarre world. That's Orwellian because it's a rigged market. It's not a free market right now. $10 billion, which is what's spent for food stamps on soda, that's not a free market. That's a rigged market.
Yeah.
And then that soda itself is being subsidized, right, with all of our subsidies, with the corn subsidies, which goes into high fructose corn syrup. So we're really like literally like rigging that system to subsidize these drinks and these this poison that's leading then to trillions of dollars of downstream medical costs. It was shocking.
Wow. So wait a minute, just to spell it out, because I mean, this is just so crazy. Coke, which is a multinational conglomerate, like mega billion dollar, if not trillion dollar net value corporation,
Right.
paid social justice
Mhm.
organizations to claim that people who are out there fighting against the overconsumption of sugar sweetened beverages were somehow racist.
Yeah. And what angers me we can get into my whole story, but why I'm so passionate about this today is because it's happening in spades today. I mean, you have leading processed food companies funneling millions of dollars to body positive TikTok influencers saying it's racist to, say that it's not health at any size, say that that's labeled as racist now. Now there's a whole campaign coordinated from food companies to shame doctors into not weighing people.
Wow.
So it's very much happening today in new modern ways, but it's very simple, right? If you're sitting, in a public relations office and thinking, "How do I win this debate?" Labeling someone as racist is a great way to shut down the debate. And
Absolutely.
it's that's not a mystery to anyone, and that's used very systematically. And unfortunately, the as a very junior person, right? One of my first jobs at one of these companies, it's, "Hey, can you put together a list of African American pastors?" And and I put together a list of dozens of African American pastors. We contacted them, co-contacted them, and paid off a lot of them. And it was a very systematic effort to bring people from different civil rights groups into the fold. The Hispanic Federation, one of the leading um, Hispanic groups, was also paid a lot of money, and this was all reported in the New York Times in
Wow.
2012. So it was pretty disheartening, and I think it's happening in spades today as well, unfortunately.
There was a recent headline, I forget what publication it was in, but it was a major one. It was either like
Yeah.
the Daily Beast or the New York Times or something. And it said that like the claim from the headline was that exercise is rooted in white supremacy.
Yeah, yeah, and what I would just say is, whenever you see a study, there's really is a systematic effort behind it. There's a systematic like these people are smart. There's billions of dollars spent on this whole effort, this whole machinery, and and that article, can usually be traced to an influencer or different groups putting that message forward. And I think it's all part of this devil's bargain, which is, which you obviously highlight all the time, which is, our food companies are systematically poisoning people. They have an incentive. The machine is to make food addictive and cheap. But then, of course, the healthcare system, who I also worked for, stands silent and profits.
Wow. So you're now out here like acting essentially as a whistleblower because you've not just both sides of the political aisle, but you've had a leg in like the food industry, the processed food industry, as well as the pharmaceutical industry. So you've been in the room where it happens, so to speak.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, I tweeted this out, and it got 14 million impressions, I think it's at, and I was a little bit surprised because it's like I think everyone implicitly knows that the system's a little bit rigged. But what I've found is it's tapped in, I think, to a similar frustration of why I'm getting into this fight, because I think it's a lot of parents, honestly.
Hmm.
I think it's like you look at what's happening to kids, and it's like, what the hell is going on? Like with the allergies, with the autoimmune conditions, with the chronic, 15% of kids having fatty liver disease now, which
It's
is just
nuts.
insane. The CDC in 2021 said that 40%, now it's skyrocketed, 40% of kids between 5 and 12 are obese, clinically obese.
Wow.
And now, to kind of complete the circle on the food stamp thing in 2012, now with that skyrocketing obesity, of course, we have a cure for it, a miracle cure. So it's not about having kids, eating healthier. Now we have an injection that the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is an institution I helped coordinate paying off while working for pharma. It's totally owned by pharma that credentials pediatricians. Now they're saying that obese 12-year-olds should have a weekly lifetime injection to cure obesity with this Ozempic thing, which is just so tragic and unconscionable because first off, it's got terrible side effects and metabolic issues, which we can get into. But even if you are losing weight and still eating that inflammatory food, that canola oil, that sugar, you're still just doing violence to your cells. And does anyone think that's going to lead to a long-term, improvement in lifespan or health span? It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, those drugs are going to lead to the ingestion of fewer calories, so they're going to lose weight. But the calories that they're eating aren't. They're going to be eating less of the same obesogenic and insulin resistance promoting foods that they were eating before. Less of it, but like still the same kinds of like junk foods that are that are encouraging micronutrient deficiencies. That are yeah.
I don't know why. Like it's it's funny to me. Like it shouldn't be me saying this, right? But it's so logical, right? It's like if you have a car and you're feeding it, water as fuel. It's something it's not supposed to be. It doesn't matter how much. It's like we fundamentally. It's obvious, right? The problem, that underlines almost every health issue in America is that we've, added sugars, seed oils, highly processed grains, these fake ingredients that have become the cornerstone of our diet. That's the problem,
Mm.
and it's these little patches. It's Ozempic. That's not going to lower obesity, I guarantee you, because statins haven't lowered heart disease. Metformin hasn't lowered diabetes. And the more SSRIs we prescribe, the more depression and suicide go up. So it's like treating these things in silos is the problem, and that's very profitable. And there's just complete silence from the medical community about the fact that we're poisoning ourselves. It's unconscionable, but the incentive I'm really trying to change. I think the most important incentive to understand um, for us as Americans is that every institution of healthcare is incentivized for people to be sick, and that's exactly what's happening.
Oh yeah, 100%. They're incentivized to keep people as you just said, yeah, sick, not healthy, but also they are incentivized to keep people alive.
Yeah, right,
Alive
right,
but sick.
right.
That to me is like the craziest thing. And we thank healthcare, right? For being able to prevent early death in many ways. That's one of the reasons why our lifespans are expanding, but we're not if you think about it, we're not actually living longer, we're dying longer.
100%. I think, yeah, I was just reading a quote from Ben Franklin said, most people die at 25, but they're buried at 70. And I think that's becoming much more true.
Oh my god, wow.
I think that's for a lot of reasons, but yeah, and I think we've gaslit the American patient. It's trust the science. It's in the face of 50% of Americans, adults having prediabetes or diabetes, 93% being metabolically dysfunctional. We've we're battering the American patient over the past several decades to not ask questions, to not diagnose, to not have awe or curiosity about what's happening in their body in the face of, terrible developments. And I think it's like that's a core thing. I mean, your podcast has had a big influence on me with personal health tips and tips on personal empowerment. But I think a key to personal empowerment is really embracing that the system is rigged and understanding the incentives. To me, it's actually an empowering message because I think patients really should have license to not listen to their pediatrician.
Hmm.
The idea that the healthcare system deserves any benefit of the doubt on chronic conditions is just belied by any data. We should absolutely not be listening to our doctor when it comes to preventing chronic conditions. And I think we've been gaslit to trust the system that's produced miracles. Yeah, I would say mostly before 1960 on acute conditions, emergency surgical procedures and, potentially antibiotics and vaccines. But the past 50 years have been chronic conditions, which has been a disaster.
Hmm. And where do these conditions come from?
Well, fundamentally, it's metabolic health. I mean, it's something you hit on a lot. I mean, to me, one of the biggest gaslighting jobs we have is breaking health into 42 subspecialties. My sister Casey, who she goes and the president of Stanford Med School, the dean, he focused on 1 square millimeter of the head and neck, and she was a head and neck surgeon. It's like these doctors like focus. We break the body down into these little, like literally millimeters that people focus like on their entire career. And I think that's very profitable. But siloing diseases has been an absolute disaster.
Hmm.
You can trace the economic incentives. It actually was really propelled by Rockefeller in the early 1900s, really trying to push pharmaceutical solutions. And he funded and really drove the curriculum at Johns Hopkins and influenced a lot of evidence-based medicine. But there was a big push at that time for more holistic, more nutritional, and that was denigrated based on corporate interests. But this idea of siloing diseases into different categories and not understanding that this food, this inflammatory food, and I'm curious what you think, and you talk about this a lot, but I think it's those added sugars, it's the seed oils, it's the highly processed grains, that turn into sugar in our blood. We've weaponized our food to be very addictive, and if we focus on that, to me, it's very simple. If we steer public policy to to decrease those 3 ingredients. What would that do to the human capital of this country?
Hmm.
How would that skyrocket just every single, including, of course, mental health? Because and this is just an awakening for me, cells are in the brain, 20% of the cells, and when you have mass metabolic dysfunction, that's impacting the brain.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course. So, I mean, the food industry is so vast, and it's so today it's like so it's become such a vertically integrated system. You have like, you have dairy production, you have meat production, you have like, plant production, and then you've got these like ultra processed foods. So, when you zoom out from a 30,000-foot view, what aspect of the food system do you find to be most problematic?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple like a couple policies that I would go to, and I think one of the biggest problems is that we are subsidizing our poisoning. Like if you talk about policies, you've got to go to grain subsidies. The fact that we spend tens of billions of dollars a year subsidizing this food stamps. When you add it all up together, it's like tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars subsidizing the poison that's causing metabolic dysfunction.
Wow.
So it's like you get into solutions, right? And I think, that sometimes people go to taxes or bans. I do think the only difference between sugar and tobacco is that sugar is an order of magnitude worse, the big sugar. But I
Interesting.
think before you even get into like contentious policies like bans or taxes, let's just stop subsidizing these ingredients we all know are bad. That gets into the third pillar and the third group, I paid off early in my career, which is tragically our trusted research institutions, which
Hmm.
have been, creating the foundational research to this day that have led us to a more high sugar, high processed grain diet.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there was that back in the was it the 70s that the Sugar Research
Yeah.
Foundation paid off a bunch of researchers that published like from what I can recall a seminal paper. It was like published in like the New England Journal of Medicine or something comparable, JAMA, I
Yeah.
forget.
Right.
And it basically like, took the blame off of sugar and it placed the blame for the cardiovascular disease epidemic at the time on fat. And so that led to this whole like influx of like ultra processed, low fat, and fat free foods on the market. And sugar was basically let out of the doghouse.
That study, that Harvard study, bought and paid for by sugar, I think has millions of deaths and blood on that study.
Wow.
That Harvard study from the head of the Harvard nutrition group was weaponized to influence the food pyramid,
Wow.
which and the food pyramid. Americans listen to medical authorities. We got to defer to somebody. And you look at the proportion of carbs and fat in the American diet, carbs went up like 20% in the next like 5 years.
Mm.
So we've completely like we have to trust someone that led to total destruction. And what's unsettling is you kind the food pyramid that's from the 90s. It's still happening to get today. I'm a Harvard grad and have talked to people on this journey that do nutrition research at Harvard. Um, and there's been quotes on this publicly. It's still bought and paid for by
Mm.
processed food companies. Processed food companies spend 11 times more on research for nutrition than the NIH.
That's insane.
And the NIH is also very problematic because it's basically a grant making organization that funds professors who are highly compromised. But yeah, it would be, we would hope this is over, but now, a foundational nutritional research funded by the NIH and directly funded millions of dollars by processed food companies
Mm.
is now saying Lucky Charms is
Yeah.
healthier than it, as you've highlighted, the Lucky Charms healthier than eggs. And I'll say, that's a viral headline. You dig into this and systemically, they have a dairy category, and the most highest rated dairy is chocolate almond milk.
No way.
Yeah,
That's the highest rated
the
dairy?
highest rated orange juice is a 94, highly encouraged.
Wow.
And you just go. It's systematically. It's an algorithm, and this algorithm is now being used by food companies to impact childhood nutrition policies. It systematically overweights highly processed grains.
Yeah.
Cheerios are rated as good as quinoa, and 20 points higher than bulgur.
Oof.
And Cheerios is the highest rated grain in the grain category.
Oh
And
my god.
that anything that can stay on the shelf for years, you got to be a little bit skeptical of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the food compass from Tufts kind of went viral this week. It's been out for some time, and I actually like a couple months ago when I was on Rogan, I talked about it.
Right.
But he posted about it. He posted a headline on his Instagram this week, which caused it to go majorly viral.
Yeah, yeah.
And you were talking about it, right? You've been talking about
Yeah,
it.
and that article actually linked to something me and my partner Justin
Mm,
wrote. So Justin actually you highlighted it, and then Justin wrote a viral article. I tweeted that out. It got I think like 4 million views. So
wow.
there's been I think us in the battle here have re-exposed that, and it's got into Rogan,
Yeah.
and now they're actually calling for a congressional investigation. So
Well,
yeah,
it's gotten some pushback. Like I've seen a lot of people in the so-called evidence-based community on social media push back and say that the graph that was shown that was created by uh, among other authors, Ty Beal, who's the nutrition
yeah,
researcher whose work I follow and who I've become sort of acquainted with.
same.
Yeah, they they picked out these different like food items to show the ridiculousness
Right.
and the fault in the algorithm. And then you've got some people from the evidence-based community that reacted to the fervor and were like, "Oh, well, the items were never meant to be compared across categories." But if you actually go to the Tufts website, Tufts did exactly the same thing, just with different foods, that didn't necessarily illustrate the ridiculousness of the algorithm. But it's all there. I mean, like it's literally it references many times throughout the study that these scores are meant to be compared to one another.
As you pointed out, I
It's
think it
absurd.
wasn't even in the press release, that note. To this day, on their website, in their press section, go to their press section, and they have headlines of like why Cheerios are healthier than coffee, comparing between the groups.
It's insane.
They have massive quotes from their team in the press release and various press comparing things between the groups.
Yeah.
So that's just absolutely not true.
Right.
And of course, this is literally like, and I can tell you, right? Um, Literally in a PR office in Washington, D.C., people are putting together lists of professors.
Mm.
And let's just all like use our comment. We're lectured and batted over the head as patients of evidence-based medicine. There's billions of dollars of nutritional research. There's, these absolute like behemoth institutions on nutrition research. And you kind of ask, what's the solution? It's like, I really think it's actually pretty simple. Like we have to stick to whole foods and have to get like away from processed foods. It's a matter of public policy. And this over-intellectualizing of putting processed foods and yeah, I'll just say what I would have done as a PR consultant and what I think is happening now is it is cross group. You know, there's schools deciding whether to feed kids, beef and eggs or processed grains. And this is being used. Hey, we can keep the Cheerios for the kids and not need to shift more to eggs or
Mm.
better sources of protein. That's exactly what this is being used for.
But why do you think the researchers, after seeing the chart that went viral, right, where like Lucky Charms were placed above a poached egg or
Right,
ground
right,
beef,
sure.
like in that moment, how come they were like they didn't realize like, oh my god, like we made a huge mistake, like this is absurd. Is
I
it just
mean,
is it money?
I think there's another probably Benjamin Franklin quote about, you could explain the incentives, you can explain everything. I mean, healthcare right now is the largest, most employed industry in the United States and the fastest growing. It
Wow.
is this absolute behemoth. I was recently in Texas and the governor of Texas was speaking and he was bragging that the Texas Medical Center in Houston can be seen from space and how many
Wow.
jobs. And this is a conservative, and that's not good, right? But both sides, it drags you in, right? And you can justify. And what I saw working for these folks is there's very few people that are like consciously looking in the mirror and trying to figure out how to poison kids. Like you can justify it, right?
Yeah.
You can justify, what I hear from the big justification is, oh, you're not going to get somebody to go from Lucky Charms to an egg. You got to go from Lucky Charms to Cheerios. And this whole like incremental approach. That's a very convenient thing to say when you're being funded millions of dollars for that exact study by Cheerios. It's just like,
Yeah.
you can intellectualize it. And I do think they believe this, but what I am compelled to speak out on it and why I, really want to speak plainly on this, it sounds trite, but it's like 25% of kids now have prediabetes. It's like this is not like funny.
Yeah. It's not funny.
And I think there's a lot of good people at these nutrition schools, got into the right reason, dedicated folks. But like this is causing violence to kids.
Yeah.
And when you think about public policy, right? We're talking about, that recently this week, they said, we got to get rid of gas stoves. It's like, what? We are being distracted systematically.
Yeah.
And this is another tactic. It's like there is one issue we should be caring about. It's that our cells are dysregulated at an exponential rate. It's like that impacts like our reality. And it's like it's first order to any other issue. And we're being systematically distracted because it's very simple. Health and food are two of the most employed industries in the United States. They're growing, and there's a huge interest to keep it that way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like people, like I follow a bunch of nutrition researchers, obesity researchers on Twitter, and what you might gather from following them is that we have no idea why there's so much obesity
Oh
today,
yeah.
right? But we freaking know. I mean, you walk down aisles of any major supermarket, and it's blatantly obvious why so many people are obese.
It's like, what a conundrum.
Yeah.
It's like this is a issue in the past 50 years. Like you look at the statistics and pictures from 50 years ago. What could it possibly be?
But why? So one nutrient profiling system, because the Tufts Food
Mm,
Compass is like one of many that have been devised over the years, and one that I think is actually really good,
mm,
or at least the least bad of them all, is the Nova, which was devised in Latin America, and it
mm,
basically ranks food according to how much the degree to which they've been processed. So
mm,
level one, you have unprocessed foods, right?
mhm,
The kinds of foods
mhm.
that like I try to base my diet around. And group four, you have like the ultra processed foods. In fact, I think this nutrient profiling system is kind of what coined the term ultra processed foods, which is now used ubiquitously throughout the nutrition literature. But like, why wouldn't something like that get adopted widely? Is it just because the food industry like clearly wouldn't allow for something like that to happen because it would place all of their most highly profitable foods in group four, which are the foods to be minimized?
There's inertia right now, right? I talk about the grain subsidies and the corn subsidies. Only 0.4% of subsidies go to fruits and vegetables, right? And that's influenced how all farming practices take place, the monocropping. So it's this momentum. And again, just diving into the incentives, I think it's very, very nefarious because 78% of states in the United States, their largest employer is either Walmart, a food retailer, or a hospital.
Wow.
And you just think about those conversations with 78% of US senators, right? That's their most important constituency. And again, it's just this devil's bargain. Food companies want to keep it that way. And they make good art. They still to this day are saying that Coke is, cheap calories and that it's all about calories, calorie in, calorie out. And they're literally to this day showing studies that questioning sugar's role in obesity. Like
Mm.
those are still actually being propagated. They make those cases. They say it's cheap calories. They say it's American competitiveness, and they keep the jobs. And that's what happens. And I think, as far as being optimistic, I think there's two aspects at play. One is there's a bottoms up revolution happening. I think COVID's woken a lot of people up. I think a lot of moms, it's kind of like me. It's looking forward. I'm worried about my kid. Looking backwards, I had a similar situation to you. I'm in this fight because my mom died too early of pancreatic cancer, which is a metabolic condition. 90% of people with pancreatic cancer have prediabetes or diabetes.
Wow.
And that woke me up, thinking about her whole life where, high cholesterol, put on a statin, high glucose, put on metformin. She had gestational diabetes with me. These were all just quick things to treat, not warning signs, which could have really turned her life around. And I think the average person in this country is looking forward, concerned about the future, looking back, concerned about what's happening to their parents. I mean, and people are less healthy than they should be. So I think people are waking up, and we're getting a little bit of a bombs up revolution. But also from like the macro perspective, this system is unsustainable. Like we are going to cease to exist as a country.
Mm.
We hear about the healthcare costs. I think these stats go around so much our eyes gloss over. But it's simple math, right? It's 20% of GDP right now, growing at an increasing rate. It's going to be 40% in 15 years. There's no factors right now that are slowing down that growth rate. I think we just assume it's going to get better. But by definition, that's unsustainable. And the only way we can turn that trend around is by food. We're not going to drug our way out of the situation.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So that does give me optimism, but I think it's very important to be beating this drum and having that bottoms up revolution, because the sooner we can get to food as the center of medicine, the better we're going to be.
But you get pushback even on social media from like who you would expect to be well-meaning healthcare professionals,
You see
right?
that? You see a lot of that
I
from,
see a ton of it. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I see a lot of like dietitians that are, I mean, now a ton of dietitians follow me and,
sure.
and a lot of really wonderful medical doctors follow me and nutritionists from all different, corners really of the healthcare spectrum. But you do get a lot of this on social media where you hear like food is food. There's no such thing as a good or bad food. All foods fit, it's all about calories in, calories out. Obviously calories matter. We're not refuting that. But is it just like mass brainwashing, or are they being funded to some degree by these food companies, or is it just like ignorance? Like, I mean, where does that come from?
Well, I think there's a couple different areas. So I think there's huge incentives to over intellectualize, as I said. There's just this massive industry of people
Of expertise.
of expertise who again just follow the incentives. They lose if food becomes less complicated, right? They lose if we have simple guidelines. Again, for me, and the foundational principle for I'm thinking about for my son and me is just like if you scan the label for added sugar, seed oils, processed grains, you're pretty much put to whole food, and then additional to that, think about the macronutrients, micronutrients that you need and really try to match that. But that inevitably leads you to a whole food diet, and thinking about the hormones and all those other things in the meat and getting good, high quality food. It's not that complicated. And it's really a journey that's added a lot to my life. And I think it's really like important just as a human to like have more awe and curiosity about what you're eating. There's a huge industry to keep people though in confusion and fear, really. So I think you see a lot of that. I mean, I've been getting some attacks too. I've also been getting a lot of, I'm sure as you have, private DMs of people that are just like, "This is screwed." Like
Yeah.
the incentives are crazy.
Yeah.
I would really question. This is one thing I'd push on, and I think is important for everyone. Is like there's think about the incentives for the media. They're going to take those one or two right TikTok videos, saying that you can eat whatever you want and it's racist to say that any food is bad, and blow that up. Like those are more often than not funded by food companies in some way. I mean,
Mm.
Nestle did a massive campaign to spread that message, and
Wow.
it wasn't disclosed. I don't know if you saw that. But and then it gets blown up. But I just don't think the norm. That's just not normal. I think actually the vast majority of the American people are like, what the hell's going on? Like,
Wow.
and actually like we should realize that most people I think are sane. I think there's also this like weaponization and calculation, to be quite frank, among food companies that now because the majority of the American population is obese, it's kind of like you can batter people not to like comment on obesity. And there's this big movement, right? There's a calculated push, as we talked about, for doctors not to weigh people anymore,
Oh, it's insane.
right? But I don't think most people like that, even people that are struggling with their weight.
Yeah.
It just obesity is a physical manifestation of cellular dysfunction.
Yeah.
If you are obese, you are just scientifically, gonna live a less happy, shorter, more tortured life. You're gonna have a lot more comorbidities,
Yeah.
and I think most people wanna reverse that. So
Absolutely. But now, but like why I just feel like, with the media now embracing obesity as a as something that's potentially healthy. It's like, why would anybody want to change? Like, is it like going from obese to normal weight is really difficult. And if you have like the media saying, well, actually it's really not that bad. It's really not unhealthy. You can be obese and, have health at any size. Then like why go through the effort?
I mean, I think what happened on 60 Minutes recently is very instructive. I think the 60 Minutes several weeks ago, their piece on obesity
I saw
is
that.
one of the most shameful pieces of journalism, and is so like it's such a case study in
Recap
what
that
I saw.
for
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
audience.
yeah. So more than 50% of funding of the ads for 60 Minutes come from pharma, right? It's like sponsored by sponsored by Pfizer. You've seen those
Wow.
reels. So literally, this segment ran before and after there was pharma commercials.
Wow.
Okay, so there's heavily funded, and they ran a piece saying that obesity is a genetic condition,
Yes.
not mentioning that it's literally a problem only in the past 50 years.
Wow.
So they said it was a genetic condition, and the doctors that they had on were paid by the drug maker for Ozempic, this new miracle cure, undisclosed.
That's criminal.
Undisclosed. Ozempic, this drug maker, has paid 30 million. This is on the CMS website. They pay $30 million per year over the past couple of years in direct consulting fees to doctors. This is not research. This is direct bribes,
Wow.
bribes. And it's a bunch of conferences, it's a bunch of boondoggles. So they've been systematically, and the whole obesity medicine field is new. I mean, what are the incentives of this new obesity medicine cure? If people start eating healthy, they're out of a job.
Right.
Ozempic is a weekly injection for the rest of the patient's life.
Right.
So there's this all-out assault. They fund the media, 60 Minutes. They're funding literally the doctors. The entire field is highly incentivized for this thing, and they fund the research. So it's just like this sounds distressing, but it's like hopefully it wakes you up. I really do think this Ozempic thing is one of the fights of our time. I think it's really resonating among a lot of
Mm.
people. But, first off, just from a budget standpoint, that they're pushing this to be funded by, insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. It's going to add hundreds of billions of dollars at least to the,
Wow.
and it's just like, think about where those hundreds of billions of dollars could go
Yeah.
if it was to incentivize food,
Hmm.
right? Think of it's just like such an opportunity cost, and it's so wrong because all you're doing is giving people a magic cure, and digging into Ozempic, and this I think speaks to how wrong we are to think of things in silos. Over 50% of people that take it have mass gastrointestinal issues,
Yeah, like
and is
nausea.
yeah, but as we know, serotonin is produced in the gut. And usually gastrointestinal issues are accompanied with increase in depression. And that's actually being shown as a side effect of Ozempic.
Hmm.
So it's like, what a great idea. Give kids this injection, 40% of teenagers, that's going to cause inevitably an increase in depression
Yeah.
because we just have no curiosity about the interconnections of the human body. And it also, in ways and mechanisms we don't even understand, even the studies, are altering your metabolism. When you go off of it, almost everyone, according to the reports, gain much more than the weight they initially had, not only because they just eat again, but because there's something that changes in the metabolism of your body.
Ooh.
It's just like this is not the route we need to go, and it's being rigged by these very bad incentives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really great that we've developed this drug and we have it and it seems to, you know, like for people as a last resort,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
To have that as an option. But I've always been about informed consent. And if
Hmm.
people are being given this drug because they're being told that their weight loss is or their obesity is genetic,
Yeah.
and that, you know, that like it's all about just calories in, calories out, and people like go on these like low calorie diets again and fail again and again and again, and they feel like they have to default to this drug.
Right.
And I think that's a major, major problem. Right. So
Mhm.
I mean, I guess I'm like happy that we now like have that as an option, just because, you know, why not? Like it's you know, some people out there are going to want to take it. Um, but they're not being. I don't think that the vast. It's probably unlikely that the vast majority of people that will choose to take it are being given the full slew of options to allow themselves to, you know, make the decision to lose weight in a more healthy and sustainable way.
Excuse me. The only way we're going to get out of this is, yeah, it's not an anti-drug stance, and I don't think that makes sense either. There are, statins might make sense at some points, maybe this Ozempic thing, but the drug first thing has been the biggest disaster of the past 50 years. I think that the idea of these miracle cures, and I think where we need to get, and again, I am optimistic. I'm a big fan of this biowearable revolution. I think we're early innings. There's a lot that needs to sort out, but I think in 10 years, I'm hoping we'll have an app, and we'll be able to measure our glucose, our ketones, our hydration, many other biomarkers, and really like understand like really tactically like what nutrients we need, what we need to do to exercise, sleep, and and have real statistics on our risk for chronic disease.
Yeah.
I think we actually could put that data together, and at the last resort, drugs. But I'm looking forward to that day, and I think it will come where the biowearable revolution is going to totally supplant the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Where because it needs to be a food first, it needs to be a metabolic health, environmental toxins, sleep, exercise, chronic stress. I mean, I think I think the whole mental health thing is really interesting too, and I draw a comparison where 25% of the country is right now on a mental health medication. And again, those are good for some people, not to crying SSRIs. There's a place for them, but that's a big societal factor,
Huge. Yeah.
and it is a numbing drug. And I really put actually the research on psychedelics, not to take too much of a left turn, but like, on the food thing, it's like it's a root. It's root cause. It gets to the cause of the trauma, really helping you understand that. That drug is stigmatized, right? Food and nutrition interventions are stigmatized. When Casey was in medical school, it was like, "Oh, you're not a nutrition. Don't talk about that." So I think we just have it backwards for mental health, for physical health. We embrace these hacks, these things that kind of band-aid over the problem, and stigmatize the root cause, and financial incentives are at play there.
Yeah. But what can your, I mean, what do you propose your average person do today? Like I think biowearables are great. Like I'm wearing an Aura ring to track my sleep, and I love this device. But like, let's be real, this is a $350 device. You know, there's like a whole slew of devices on the market now that are going to be cost prohibitive for your average consumer. So like, what is a person to do?
Well, again, this is maybe a little bit of left turn. I've been thinking hard about this because I do think we're in a pickle, and there's high level, but we have to have more awe and curiosity about the body and connections, and I do think that as psychedelics are legalized and have FDA approval, I think that's actually one element. It's a little bit of a bank shot, but I think actually like
Just put psilocybin in the water
I
supply?
really do think something like that might be a good I think it's an extreme example, but tools to have more awe and curiosity about our body. I think there's like a mental health component. I think meditation, breathing. I think like being outside of nature. I think like we've been systematically like led to think that there's like an answer for everything, like, looking at the system to provide the answers. So whatever can ground us in more of a spirit of awe and curiosity. And I just think like to give my mom an example, she had prediabetes and knew she had prediabetes. And in the years before she died, really went on a journey to like understand more about the connections of her health. She had, stacks of dozens of books, was doing meditation, was doing a lot of practices to just understand like her health. And it was too late for her. She had that pancreatic cancer growing inside her body without knowing it, but like that had a big impact on my sister and me. And like I just think like being on a path in some way to just like understand that we're being gaslit, and like being curious. And I think folks listening to this podcast, they're reading books, whether you have a biowearable or not. So I just think like that's just kind of one like like high level insight. I just think like we need to encourage folks, individually and with public policy to just be more curious because I think that health journey and trying to understand these connections that we've both been on is really gratifying. I just think as a human,
Yeah.
understanding what movement does, I went through periods where I didn't exercise that much, when I'm thinking more from a vanity perspective. But then when you think about it from just a cellular perspective and just having awe about that. But I think there's also a couple of public policy, type things we can do. I mean, as a general rule, we need to move healthcare policy more to incentivizing healthy behaviors. 95% of healthcare spending right now is interventions on people that are sick. And I just think that's the fundamental. So that's more of a long-term situation, but like that's the foundational problem. And if we're, going to get involved in politics, going to argue anything to our elected officials, it's how do you slant the incentives of healthcare to be incentivized for us to be sick? I think until we really shift that, we're in trouble because we're fighting against, the $4 trillion health system, the $6 trillion food system, and we're losing. I mean,
Mm.
80% of Americans being overweight or obese, it is a societal big problem. I don't think those people are systematically trying to shorten their lives.
Yeah.
So I think slowly understanding that as a policy level, we need to change the incentives of healthcare.
What about like inhibiting people from being able to buy junk food with food stamps?
Well, yeah, I mean, we gotta look I mean, we talked about it, but the first thing we should do is cut the fact that we pay for these things. So, the grain subsidies, food stamps. I think there's 2 more private sector things we could do. So, Bill Ackman, the hedge fund manager, um, actually retweeted what I posted and said, "It's time for a class action lawsuit
Wow.
against Coke and Pepsi." As I said, I think the only difference between Coke and Pepsi and the cigarette companies is Coke and Pepsi are much worse. The class action lawsuit against the cigarette companies, and there's been some movies on this, The Insider, is that they knowingly misled. They knew they were doing. That's what you have to prove. I saw it. Like there's a lot of proof on that, and it's interesting from being in this fight a little bit, tweeting that out. Some billionaires have contacted me. Actually, some prominent lawyers have a case ready to go, and it was surprising, right? You'd think these things would already be in motion, but there's actually like a matching problem. Both sides are ready to go, so there's some movement on that, and I
Mm.
think that's a good. Again, people listen to health authorities. It was shameful on cigarettes. I think in the 1950s, cigarette tobacco taxes were still like 7% of the US like budget,
Mm.
like their income.
Wow.
There were huge financial incentives, and I don't think it was really officially stated by the government until the late 1980s. So I think we're on a similar trajectory. So I think the class action. There's bipartisan congressional investigation interest, which is cool. I think big sugar, big food gives an enemy that's appropriate, and I think something for people to grasp onto. So I think investigating the ways they've rigged institutions of trust is appropriate, and then that there looks to be movement on that. And then, yeah, I think the first thing we have to do before we talk about bans, before we talk about anything, is stop paying for this crap with government money.
Mm. So wait, what are the food categories that are subsidized today? Isn't like beef subsidized, dairy, or no?
Yeah, so no, 80% is grains and corn.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And why is that?
lobbying. I mean, foundational,
Is it because those products are because my assumption would be, and correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah,
that it's because those products are very high margin because they're like these proprietary, like Lucky Charms is a proprietary recipe, right?
right.
That's worth billions of dollars. Like they're dirt cheap to produce these products, and the profit margins are just massive. And you don't get that delta with like beef. But I could be wrong. I don't know. Is that a like fair assumption?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assumption. Food's one of the most profitable packaged food is one of the most profitable industries. I mean, you look right now and just follow the money, as we know, 70% of the American diet is processed food. And you look at any label, it's shocking. It is crazy to me
Hmm.
what we can do as Americans with processed flour, canola oil and sugar. It's like you pick up a Nutri-Grain bar or, even like creamers or hummus, like these things just sneak in because they're cheap and subsidized. So we can really like we can do anything with these ingredients
Mm.
and they're shelf stable. Like again, like it's actually like to me I'm curious if you disagree, but highly processed grains are so evil because it's like taking off that fiber. It's take and it makes it shelf stable, but very little nutritional value. And but that can stay on the shelf for years. And
Yeah.
I think that's become a basis. And there was, during Nixon, there was this, I think, very big mistake where there was food inflation and massive food price fluctuations, and that was a defining moment, and you can actually tie a lot, to the around that period of, like, just the sky, but the food system used the fact that there were price fluctuations to say we have to have more shelf stable products.
Mm.
And that actually led to a sea change in, like, how we subsidize and how we think about food, and it was all about, like, and then, we became very prideful that America was then, able to ramp up, production and ship this diet, this shelf-stable food throughout the world and feed the world. Unfortunately, we've exported diabetes everywhere. Now China is
Yeah.
leading the world in diabetes. I've actually done some media in the UK, and they've always scoffed at Americans for being obese, but now, obesity is the majority of the population there. So unfortunately, this has been a disaster, and yeah, we need to reel it back.
Could it be argued that the proliferation of ultra processed like grain products began with good intentions, like to help, like provide cheap, plentiful calories for a rapidly growing population back when like food scarcity was more of an issue or food
Yeah, yeah.
instability,
To me, this
insecurity?
is a vital point that complicates the issue. From the folks who were working on food security, back in the '60s when these policies changed to, as we talked about, researchers today, like, not many people are looking in the mirror, and thinking they're bad or necessarily are bad people.
Yeah.
No, no, it absolute like, put yourself, from business school, from my friends, right? There are many folks who are now working at food companies, at Pepsi, at pharma companies. They're not, like, justifying that they're doing evil things. They're not evil people, they're great people. The end result, I believe, is evil. But part of the system is that it can convince everyone that they're doing okay, right? It's like, my friends who work at Pepsi, "Oh, it's so patriarchal that these lower income folks, they wanna come home and have their Doritos." And that's one of the simple joys of their life, and that is so patriarchal that you could say that, and it's calories, it's cheap calories. Oh, pharma, you can absolutely look in the mirror working for a pharma company that you're incrementally, helping on certain conditions. The problem is that nobody is asking why everyone's getting sick.
Hmm.
That's the problem, right? It's that, a medical school dean, right? They're educating the next group of doctors, right? But they accept Harvard, Stanford Med School on down. If you trace the money, it's somehow tied to pharma more than 50% of the funding that goes to those schools.
Wow.
And as Casey's pointed out to me, I think one of the most shocking statistics for me is 80% of medical schools today don't teach a nutrition class.
Wow.
And, and it's almost all pharmacology, almost the entire curriculum. It is literally like, here are the diseases. Casey's story, which had a huge impact on me, is she was an illustrious, career and credentials. She was the pride of the family, right? Like, top of her class at Stanford Med School and a surgeon. And she said she had this out of body experience where she was looking over a patient with a knife in their sinuses doing a sinusitis surgery. And and it was like her third of the day. She's done hundreds. And she realized the patient was with her 6 months ago, so they were back under the knife, and she had no idea what was causing the inflammation. She didn't learn, and then she was like, did I do something wrong?" But, like, she's like, "No, I'm, like, did a really good job." Like, doctors don't even understand why people are sick.
Hmm.
So, again, everyone can kinda look in the mirror, but the overall incentives are guiding things. And I would just add, when it comes to doctors, and I think it's tragic. I mean, the US medical system literally takes the most dedicated, smartest, high IQ people in the world come here to be doctors and then puts them in this system. I think a very instructive statistic is doctors have the highest depression and suicide rate of any profession.
Yeah.
And
Oh my
I
god.
think that's because we are taking the best and the brightest. We're throwing them into the system. We're saddling them with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, right? Their entire societal expectations of them. And then they inevitably realize the patients aren't getting better. And I think they feel trapped. I mean, they're very every doctor is a driven person. I mean, it's a very hard to be a doctor, but the patients aren't getting better. So I think that's, to me, talking to Casey and a lot of other doctors, is the reason for this, off the chart suicide and depression rate. So I do think people are realizing it. But yeah, that the biggest trick and the biggest kind of complexity of the system is it's good people inside it.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, like I have a ton of respect for people who decide to make medicine their career.
Right.
You
Me
know,
too.
it's incredible. Like
I
what
couldn't
a
do it.
yeah, I couldn't do
Yeah.
it. I mean, the rigors of that of that degree of schooling, it's just
Sure.
like it's insane. But then they enter this system where, yeah, it's been co-opted to such a significant degree by the pharmaceutical industry, right? Like the journals are all bought and paid for at this point. Um, they their salaries are paid by performing tests and treatments,
Right.
not providing solutions. And and yeah, and if they go off script, right, they're at risk for malpractice.
100%.
It's like a major issue.
I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics, if you go against their guidelines, you lose your license, and completely bought and paid for by pharma.
Mm,
I mean, if you deny a pharmaceutical intervention and suggest a more holistic treatment for a child, you are going to be reprimanded.
mm,
And it's a disaster. I mean, kids are getting much more sick. They're being born now in utero with mass metabolic dysfunction at a high rate. And we're pummeling them still with antibiotics, killing their microbiome. If you try to get to a more holistic, the American Academy of Pediatrics says processed grains are the first thing a child should eat.
really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
The doctor said this is, we have a kind of a more base doctor, and he said this is bullshit, but I have to give this to you. I have to give you these guidelines for
Wow.
the baby to eat like little processed grains. The American Diabetes Association, which actually, working back in the day, I came across working with pharma, they credential diabetes doctors, right? They set the guidelines. Until 2018, they guided that if you take insulin, you don't have to change your diet at all.
Wow.
And which is obviously crazy because if you're eating inflammatory foods and all, you're like diabetes isn't the problem per se. It's the underlying, right? So 99% of people with diabetes have another comorbidity at least, usually much more than one. So it's like they literally said you can eat whatever you want. The American Diabetes Association was directly funded millions of dollars by Coke.
Wow.
Coca-Cola was on their website and they endorsed small cans of Coke, about 5 years
Well,
ago.
as long as you're
Yeah.
drinking Coke, you're gonna need more insulin.
Yeah, but these aren't fringe groups. They credential the doctors and, you
Well,
know
that's why at the 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans committee,
That's right.
95% of them had conflicts of interest with both the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry.
There's a list at a public relations office in Washington, D.C. with those professors on them. We just need to get out of this mindset on the news when there's a peer-reviewed study that shuts down debate, right?
Yeah,
We fall for it every time.
it's so screwed up.
We fall for that every time where it's unimpeachable. We still, there's a peer-reviewed study from Tufts. Eh, these are public relations documents. Um,
Instruments to sell processed food.
yeah, back when I was working in this space, the opioids debate was heating up in 2011, 2012, and there was some investigation. So this is how it works. Um, Very much happening today with obesity and many other things. But the NIH and the FDA, usually it's not the government bureaucrats deciding, what to approve or as far as the FDA drugs or the NIH, like where to give research funding or what the guidance should be. It's often these blue ribbon panels. And the blue ribbon panels are put together, with illustrious and credentialed academics. So when there was more scrutiny on opioids, I believe it was 2011, the NIH put together a blue ribbon panel for opioid guidance. The head of that panel was the then dean of Stanford Med School, Philip Pizzo. At the I think it was I think the month he was appointed, absolutely the year, Pfizer, one of the biggest opioid makers, gave a $4 million donation to Stanford, a direct donation
Wow,
dealing with pain stuff. The majority of that panel were professors that had direct payments from opioid makers,
wow.
and they suggested and recommended, that pain is a crisis and we need to continue prescribing opioids. now today, um, fentanyl and all these opioid deaths, it's something like 90% of an opioid death it came from a legal prescription pad where they started.
Wow.
So they get addicted legally and then go out and try to find fentanyl and stuff. But the vast majority of opioid deaths in that class, which is just a scourge right now, started from a prescription pad. So, you know, I'm sure these are good people. I'm a Stanford grad too, and people are like, oh, I'm getting calls. Hey, you don't want to upset the apple cart. You need to be in the club. I don't like kids are dying. Like 25% of kids have. I think we need to like be respectful of folks, but like you've been leading the charge here, but and I'm sure people have tried to shut you up, but and pushed you on stuff. But like I think we've got to speak plainly here, not impugning anyone, but it's just simple conflicts.
Yeah.
Money, like we're being asked to believe that billions and billions of dollars is being spent on research and from these companies and they don't want something.
Hmm.
That's just crazy.
Is there collusion between the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry?
So I call, like I said, I call the devil's bargain. You can call it, you name it whatever you want. To me, it's silence. I mean, you do you do have some funny things like Monsanto buying Bayer, where it's like just a
Yeah.
it's just a closed loop of like the GMOs and like poisoning our food supply, and then getting them on the other end. So you actually do have some absolutely ridiculous, and that was called out by a lot of people. But like, I mean, that is just absurd, right? It's just a closed loop situation where they're making us sick and then profiting from it. So that's an absurd example. Um, I, I think take this is my psychoanalysis, even like the dean of a medical school, right? They're not thinking that they're colluding on this, but they do think that nutrition is like a niche,
Hmm.
like Casey, when she started, residency, there was a sign above, the surgeon's kind of break room. It said, "Don't be a pussy." And they called nutrition, pussy medicine. It's just like,
Interesting.
yeah, like that's the culture.
Wow.
It's a very
So
and
it's literally like these like academics behind the ivory in the up in the ivory tower, literally saying to themselves, "Let them eat cake."
yeah, yeah,
It's kind
no,
of like that.
no, it's like, listen, in the American system, right? When they look at the mirror, the doctors stand ready to clean up the mess of these dumb Americans, right? They don't have any say on like the fact that people are getting sick, but they stand ready with their prescription pad and their scalpel to clean up the mess, and they see themselves as heroic. In medical school, and I think this is very like embedded, and it's embedded in how we think about we think surgery or these things are a rite of passage, and it's like macho, for men and women, right? It's just like it's this intervention, and it's like serious medicine. You're cutting into a body. It's just much more interesting, right? Surgery is a barbaric act. These pills, like, we don't even understand them. I mean, the studies on even SSRIs and a lot of it's like they don't work on a lot of people. Like
Yeah.
like they're very like we know nothing about the human body. Like you think in 200 years we're gonna look back on today and think like we like had it figured out.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
like it's very kind of arrogant, right? And with food too, it's just like I don't
Super.
need to see a nutrition study. It's just like we're evolutionally made over hundreds of millions of years to ingest certain things. And like if you generally try to track back to like what we're evolutionary made to eat, like follow that. And whether you fall more, and I'm more on your side with I think meat is great, but like if you're matching the macronutrient, whatever diet you use, it's just like that's probably right. Like it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's this culture I think where interventions in medicine are serious medicine, and nutrition is for nutritionists.
Yeah. Totally. The whole like credentialist thing I think is a big it's as you described earlier. It's like, what use is there for these institutions that provide these types of credentials if, on the other hand, nutrition is just like as simple as eat your meat and vegetables.
I mean, you have a doctor, Casey, who did like a couple square millimeters. It's like sinusitis, like inflammation of the sinuses, like boom, 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 hundreds.
Yeah.
You've got doctors that they're itises. There's dozens of these itises, and it's dozens of surgeries, dozens of issues. kids popping up with kids all the time, ear infections, etc. And it's like that system relies on the patient and the doctor feeling like they're doing something, and they
Yeah.
they are like you are relieving but like what is causing the inflammation? Just one, and in Casey and I are working on a book together, and this is a concept that really helps me is inflammation, which is underlying everything and very related to metabolic dysfunction. Like what is that? It's the body reacting to a foreign threat. Like inflammation is usually like should be good. It's like the body like jumping on something and bringing together aspects to kill it. What is happening now is this foreign food that we're eating is leading our bodies to be in a state of constant there's a foreign, like, invader at all times in our
Mm.
body, and and we're constantly inflamed. It's like when you just start trying to understand, like, what is actually happening, and it makes a lot of sense. We're ingesting like, seed oils weren't invented until 1909. Like, added sugar is basically a new invention. That just came on the scene in the early 1900s. And then highly processed grains are a new invention. They were invented around 1910 too. So it's just like we have foreign things in our body that's causing our body to react.
Clearly.
And it's like, again, like it's crazy on Twitter, and I'm sure you get this too. It's like we're not doctors, but there's hundreds of people reaching out. It's like, how do it's so much frustration, so much. I'm like, if you're reaching out to me, that's but it shows how there's like people are being let down to a systemic degree.
Yeah. Well, I think one obvious way where there's overlap with the process between the processed food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, or at least the healthcare industry,
Right.
is the fact that certain foods in the supermarket are seemingly able to make health claims
Mm.
and present the Red Heart Healthy logo, whereas others are not. And when you look at the foods that are most likely to make health claims, they're the ultra processed foods, right? You're not seeing like health claims, like a sticker with health claims on an avocado or broccoli or on a package of
Mhm.
grass fed, grass finished ground beef,
Yeah.
but you see it on the box of Cheerios. You see it on the bottles of grain and seed oils.
Right.
That's a big problem.
Well, so I'm working with some doctors right now in this new company, Truemed, and we're writing prescriptions for food. So we're diving deep into the food as medicine research. And if you have a prescription, you can actually buy food tax free with your FSH. As I say, it counts as a medical expense.
Wow.
But diving deep into this, and the IRS has given some guidance. And, in the past, it's been like, well, if it's labeled as gluten free and you're celiac, then you can, count that. But but what we've been pushing, we've been getting guidance from the IRS. That's ridiculous. It's like just because of just because of a box, you don't go off the label of the box, right? But literally, like that's what the current guidance is. It's like it needs to be labeled a certain
Got it.
way on the box,
Got it.
gluten free or high fiber. It's like we're in this bizarre world. So what we're doing is working with various people, various agencies to educate them on how food really is medicine, and you should not go off the marketing labels on the box. It's
No,
it's 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 not great fiber when it's fortified with fiber. You want that. You want fiber from real foods, right?
absolutely.
And the medical research on how that can turn diseases around. I mean, it is. It shouldn't be that surprising to folks, but like PCOS. The leading cause of female infertility, up to 25% of women now have it. It's skyrocketing. It's a metabolic condition. It's on the same spectrum as diabetes. And there's a lot of interventions. You go to the doctor and they might have some surgical interventions they recommend. It's extraordinarily effective, a whole foods keto diet. It's like by far. So anyway, it's just been interesting, and it's been an education process. It's like just because it says gluten free or just because it says heart healthy you shouldn't go by that. We need to go by the research and really think about prescribing food, and it always gets to whole food. It always gets to whole food, I think.
Yeah.
And the whole marketing on food has just been it's absolute conscious confusion of. I mean, that is textbook 101 to confuse. It's to confuse and hijack the institutions of trust is the playbook I saw.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I get like some plant-based advocates coming over to my page,
Mhm.
when I'll post about the nutritional value of eggs, for example,
Right.
and they'll comment, some like snarky comment which they think is like a gotcha.
Right.
Why are eggs like, the only food that like why are eggs banned from being able to like claim that they're healthy? And I'm like, well, there are some pretty unhealthy foods in the supermarket that are able to claim that they're healthy. So I'm not sure that that's
Are they
the
banned? The eggs are banned from claiming.
I don't know. I don't. I don't actually know, but
Oh,
it is a common talking point that I see a lot on social media. Although, if I recall, like, I mean, there are definitely some cartons where they advertise like the DHA
yeah,
content of
yeah.
eggs and things like that. So
They should be.
yeah,
I mean, you point this out really well. It's like I think we're just totally consciously confused on just how we think about food. Like we need to see food as the underlying attributes of what it is. It's like a matching problem. It's like I just think we've been totally like brought out of the curiosity and awe of like what's going on in our bodies. This is a ton of information, 1 ton of information we're putting in our bodies per year.
mm,
And your graphics on the eggs, and all of those micronutrients. And then you have a little bit of curiosity and dive into what those macronutrients do for our cells. I mean, it's like we're so detached from this. We're so like detached from like what like choline, like that's actually good. We should have that or vitamin D or just like, and I think we've got to just see food. We've got to see food as medicine. I mean, it's foundationally, um, we're just not going to out hack that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what is so with Truemed?
Yeah.
Explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I been very inspired by Casey, as I said, and the formative experience with my mom, and looking at the world my new son is going into. I mean, I do think this is the first order issue, these healthcare incentives, and the fact that we are all incentivized to be sicker for longer periods of time, as you said. So that's what I decided after selling a previous e-commerce company to devote my life to, and it's the question of how do we incentivize healthy behaviors and met this guy, Justin Mayers, who you've had on the podcast before. He started
Yeah.
Kettle and Fire, Perfect Keto. He had some health issues when he was working in tech years ago and got really into keto and started these category defining companies, but he passed those off and we bonded over this question. And as I mentioned, um, we the HSA FSA is an interesting policy instrument. We Most people have access to it. I've always declined it because it's actually this tool of pharma, right? It's like money for when you're sick. So it's these tax-free accounts
Mm,
for to use on medical expenses, but they're often use it or lose it. So I've never contributed. A lot of people our age don't contribute because it's like, oh, I'm not sick yet. But it's kind of this, nefarious. I think it's the pharma incentives, how we think about that. It's like it doesn't make sense to have like this account for when you're sick. We should be using healthcare policy to stay healthy. What we found is you can actually use these accounts to stay healthy.
mm,
The IRS requires a note. We can question the validity of that, but if you have a note from a doctor saying that dietary intervention or exercise or other things that improve your metabolic health, like buying innate sleep or a sauna, is good for preventing a condition, which we know it is. Good sleep, good food, exercise. Um, we substantiate that in a note, and then you can buy those items tax free. So you can
mm,
buy, for instance, like a Peloton or innate sleep, and we're creating a payment integration. So it just does that compliance work right in the payment flow, like PayPal, and we're integrating with some leading vendors. So it's a small thing, although, this could be thousands of dollars of savings per family
yeah.
per year, saving 30-40% on your exercise equipment,
Mm,
supplements, um, and we have some great relationships with some leading brands, and we're just gonna try to be that simple compliance layer for healthy products, to make it very easy for you to use your HSA FSA. So ideally, people hear about this, it's just one button on your open enrollment. I've never used my HSA FSA. We maxed out $7,200 this year for the first time, and we can spend that on food and exercise for our family. So that's the kind of angle of the fight we're taking. I think what it represents to me, and you talked about solutions earlier, is like that's the type of public policy we really need to expand. I mean, imagine if we, instead of giving that hundreds of millions of dollars of government funding for Medicare and Ozempic, we had cards for folks to, particularly lower income folks, to actually buy healthy food.
mm,
I mean, take a 30-year-old on Medicaid who's diabetic. That's what's bankrupting our country. That person is going to have many comorbidities, cost millions of dollars of taxpayer money to treat. I think what if we thought about incentivizing healthy food for them, even paying them to exercise? That would save us a lot of money. So to us, this is a 20-year battle to shift policy more towards incentivizing healthy food. And we're grateful. Justin is in the fight with you. He posted about the food compass, and we've been dragged into working with legislators right now on potentially investigating soda companies. So this is our self actualization to try to be in the fight with you and many others to try to push this forward.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, how do you prevent, so if that's a fund that is meant to be used by sick people in times
Mhm.
of desperation, how do you prevent then like predatory practices from the supplement industry or even from like the health food industry from like
To rig this.
to rig this and try to like
Yeah.
get, get some of that money?
We are integrating and choosing who we integrate with. So
Because
we
like
have an
I would hate for somebody who's like really sick to then be like to come across like an Instagram ad or something for some like MLM, supplement
element.
or
Yeah.
yeah, juice powder and like,
Right.
you know, and then use those funds.
It's a great point. So we are choosing each vendor we integrate with. So we're not actually providing a letter of medical necessity that you can use for anything. We're choosing, and we've actually been approached by massive companies that do hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that would be great for us. We have a clinical board decide, like of food as medicine doctors of doctors on the program decide. So this is going to be very up the fairway. This is going to be foundational supplements, vitamin D, things like that, things that are quantitatively proven to help with sleep. You know, going through the research on cold plunges, saunas, things like that. We're going to have an extensive review, but that is I think what is existential to our company is the trust.
Yeah.
And I think most companies and institutions rightfully lose trust, and we wanna be a signpost. Justin's done very well. I'm, you know, I'm this is my life's work. This is why we're talking out about it, and we wanna kinda be a trusted company with an open dialogue and only have we will never have a highly processed food that we
Yeah.
recommend it. Over time, and we'll be integrated with inventory of, I think, large food services, but we will never compromise on that, and never ever approve, for instance, something with sugar, seed oils, or processed grains.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on like the person and where they're at. Because it's like if somebody's got like cancer and they're like, "Oh, maybe this cold plunge tub is going to work for me." I'm like, "Bro, you need chemotherapy." Like those funds
Mm.
should probably be earmarked for like, you know, more substantial medical treatment.
Well, yeah, but I think the biggest problem and the biggest one of the biggest lies in medicine today is that people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are healthy.
Yeah,
I think that's this like kind of myth, right? I think we're brewing metabolic dysfunction now. So my theory is a lot of people in their 30s and 40s, if you take their biomarkers and really analyze them, there's early signs of metabolic dysfunction that's going to result in, small things like fatigue and depression, but, potentially lead to those cancers early on. So
yeah,
what that's the leverage point I think we're trying to impact. I think our target customers, somebody that's healthy in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. But I think everyone, the statistics I think show this is brewing metabolic dysfunction. And it would be such a high leverage point for those healthy people, to be taking more and more action to maintain their metabolic health. So, even wealthy people, right? It's like food is expensive, like healthy food's expensive. I think, as we talked about, the crappy food is subsidized. So if you can bend that cost curve down, look, we've got to figure out ways to do that. And I think it's the highest leverage and most important thing we can do. I would love to have the conversation with anyone, about what's better to prescribe some broccoli or
Mhm.
great or great meat or pasture raised meat or whatever, or a pill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think about? There's that meme that you see on social media sometimes. It's like there's like two booths. They're like lemonade stands
sure.
essentially, and one has a sign above it that says like, doing the work, exercising, eating a healthy, nutritious diet, sleeping well, mitigating stress. And the other is like, the easy route, take the pill. And
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
see all the people lined up for the easy route.
Right.
Isn't there some degree of like, accountability that like that people have to acknowledge or that like, we have to acknowledge that like people generally want the easy way out. They want to cut corners when given the opportunity.
So I'm a big free choice guy I'm a free market guy. I'm a libertarian. Um, Two answers to that. One is this is a bottoms up revolution, and I'm trying to get this word out because I think it is empowering to understand the incentives and to try to break free to them. That's how this revolution is going to start. But I've become more kind of less on that, like as a societal level. I really do think like I have huge empathy for people right now where 10 trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars are stacked against them. I mean, we're fighting against really, really hard things. I really do think the only way we're going to societally change this thing is if we absolutely say we're stopping buying diabetes water for poor
Yeah.
people. It's addictive. We like drugs and dopamine drive so much of what we do, and it's like hard for anyone to fight that. And we're weaponizing our food for kids. I mean, you look at kids around a cake at a 3-year-old's birthday party, they look like a bunch of meth addicts.
Mm.
And it's just like we're wiring that in their brain. So I think that's my theory of change. It's like let's empower, let's get this message out. Let's have people, I think people are waking up and trying to break free from the system in various ways. Let's work on incentives. So if we can save people $2,000 per family with this with Truemed, that's something. I mean, that's gonna lead to more exercise, more, it's just basic incentives. And then let's keep trying to but I think we've got to fundamentally change the $4 trillion in healthcare to be more to incentivizing good things. Because right now it's all about incentivizing bad things.
Yeah.
I just think that we have to, that's the long-term battle. And I do think, again, 80% of people in this country who are obese or overweight,
It's
it's like
crazy.
they're not systematically trying to like miss, their child's wedding. It's just like
Yeah.
they're not trying to systematically be hurting their kids, which is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Like, why don't I get to pay less for my health insurance? With
Well,
all the attention that I put on my own personal health and sovereignty.
well, health insurance is, I mean, this is something people miss all the time. Health insurance is also totally incentivized for us to be sick.
Mm.
Even like prominent health, scholars with good credentials. Oh, well, insurance, they want prices to go down. They're gonna, they're an ally. No, no, they're not. According to the Affordable Care Act, they can only take 15%. They have to pay out 85% medical loss ratio. So they can only have a 15% profit margin by law because of the whole populist uprising around Affordable Care Act, that them taking, high profit margins. So they're capped at 15%. And by law, they can raise premiums to get that 15%.
Mm.
So this is something I think few people understand is the insurance is incentivized for the pie to be as large as humanly possible. And I've talked to C-suite executives at some of the largest insurance companies. They're not bad people, but they acknowledge these incentives. Anything an insurance company says about, health or wellness is total PR.
Mm.
No money's being put into that because they want the pie to be bigger. And that's a huge problem with insurance, totally rigged. And of course, those incentives are driving outcomes where premiums are skyrocketing, everyone's getting sicker.
Yeah. So if you've got like parents listening to this,
Sure.
which you do, if you've got
Yeah.
CEOs of large corporations listening to this, which you do, like, what is the message that you would send to them? Like, how can we from the ground up start to change things?
Well, I've got one tactical message for CEOs. So my previous company, we did the PPO plan which is kind of crazy actually. It's the health, the gold standard healthcare plan, right? And everyone was dissatisfied because nobody used their insurance. I think this is what Google and Amazon and actually a lot of forward thinking companies do. For your healthcare plan as a CEO, go to a high deductible HSA. You save money, but do that and then put that money into contributions to the HSA. It actually balances out because it's about the same amount as just doing like the gold standard PPO plan. The deductible's higher, but the deductible is usually like $3,000, which you can transfer to the HSA. So if somebody has chronic conditions, they're pregnant, they can just pay their deductible and it's basically the same thing. But for most people, I mean, I think it's like 90% of people in their 30s don't go to the doctor once. They can build up that HSA and actually use it to be healthy, thousands of dollars. So that's just one tactical thing. I would really look into like contributions to the HSA because we've got to get, and that's much better for employees who aren't going to the doctor. They can use that money instead of the company just incinerating the money on employees that aren't even going to use their insurance. That's one thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's just being on this journey. I mean,
Yeah.
like I think it's just being curious. It's having the license to be curious. It's having, it's so fearful, right? To go against the American Academy of Pediatrics. But
Mm.
like just having a little bit of curiosity, having a little, don't be gaslit. And
Yes.
gosh,
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, but also like, um, cultivating awe and curiosity. Like if you happen to find yourself in a position of leadership, whether it's you're the leader of a family or the leader of a company, or you have a men's group and you have the opportunity to talk about this stuff, like I think it's so important to bring up these kinds of topics and to initiate, when given the opportunity, conversation.
I mean, going into the medical system led to the most important 13 days of my life. Just as one example of having the courage to question a little bit. When my mom was diagnosed, they said that they want to do some interventions. And, it's so scary, right? It's like you're a pediatrician, or in this case, an oncologist, and they're in such a position of power.
Mm,
And they're like, we need to do a biopsy. Well, it's COVID protocol, so she's going to be alone, and the biopsy will probably get infected. So she's probably going to be, you're not going to be able to see her. 99.9% of times, it's like, you don't question your oncologist
right.
or your, in a lot of cases. Casey luckily asked some questions, and she asked, what chance does this have to increase her life? What chance? 50% increase, maybe a week. 50% actually decrease her life expectancy.
Damn.
It was actually like, no, like, and it's just like, but it's like, we're going to fight. And of course, those procedures would generate hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we, to the aghast, reaction of Stanford oncologists, said no. And we spent, instead of my mom locked up in, with COVID protocols, us not seeing her, we had the most profound 13 days of our life in our house during my mom's final days, where she read, letters, hundreds of letters from people that she's impacted their lives, and, embraced my dad in her final waking moments and saying how beautiful life was. And it's just like, it like changed my life. And like, that was a just tangible example to me. It's like questioning the system. And I felt bad for others, because we had this doctor, who has gone through this crazy experience dropping out of the medical system. Most people don't have that. So just like, I think it's the same with kids. I think we're setting up kids for such failure.
Mm,
like pummeling them with antibiotics, like allergies, it's just like, it's a no-brainer for me. Like, give kids whole foods,
yeah.
like, like just like they're made to chew a piece of broccoli, or we give them a piece of steak, like a nice. It's just like they're made evolutionarily to do. They're not made to eat processed mush.
Yeah.
So it's just like, but that's not what the Academy. They say it's a choking hazard. It's actually less of it. Like there's whole gaslighting on that. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, it just to me, it's like a key to a rewarding life. It's like so foundational, our health, our kids' health, and like asking questions is like, it's a good thing. And sometimes drugs are the right answer. And, sometimes listening to the doctor is the right answer, but like we should be aware of the incentives.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We should be in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
There's many biological mechanisms that determine how much food you're going to want to take in when you become satisfied. There's many hormones that govern these processes that are modulated by whatever different kinds of foods that you eat, and which is why if you go on a more healthy diet, it's suddenly spontaneously much easier to eat fewer calories and then lose weight.